New mum nearly wrecks her car for a parking spot. So this isn't nearly as crazy as a lot of the other stories on here, but backstory time. This happened about 4 years ago. My mum and I were going to a social security office to get some paperwork done for my mum's new Medicare and disability. My mum had been fighting a rare form of cancer for years. I don't want to say which kind, as I wish to respect my mother's privacy. And finally got into remission, but her body had been fried on accident by an incompetent doctor who ignored all the warnings he was given by the other doctors he corresponded with about the radiation required for the treatment. So, she dealt with chronic excruciating pain that would cause her so much pain that she would be laying on the floor bawling. Her health declined and she was put on a really high doses of medication that caused a lot of different awful side effects. Anyway, now the incident. Mum and I were in the car. We found a parking spot pretty close as Mum couldn't walk too far, and as far as we could tell, everything else close by was taken, even the disabled parking spots. So the car pulls out and we start to drive forward, and immediately some lady whips around the corner and straight into the parking space, coming within a foot or two of hitting our car. I got really angry because she nearly hit us, and I knew if we had to walk all the way from the other end of the lot, which was huge because this was downtown and their main location in the city, that Mum would be in serious pain afterwards. I got really mad and yelled, asking the lady what she was thinking. She flipped us off and so we drove away. Mum looked for another spot and within a couple of minutes, a car pulled out of a handicapped spot and we got right next to the door. Talk about lucky. I did have a couple of words with her later, and she said she needed and deserved the parking space more because of her newborn baby, and she didn't care if my mum was sick, and that pissed me off even more. Okay, great. Risk having a wreck with a baby in the car. Such a smart move. Mum of the frickin' year right here. XD. I wanted to say that to her, but didn't, and walked off. But hey, at least we got the better parking spot. Winky face. Edit. Yes, she actually had a baby with her. I hadn't seen it in the car, but noticed when we spoke face to face. We did tell an on-site cop, but he didn't care at all. I'm not sure how old it was, to be honest. I'm guessing a month or so? No idea. Also, if she hadn't almost wrecked, it wouldn't have been such a big deal. Edit 2. I'm legally blind. Not that it matters, but that is why Mum was driving. I went with her in case anything happened since her health was so unreliable. And yes, my mum confirmed that she nearly hit us. Why do I feel like a criminal in the trial here? Jesus. And our next story was posted by user Mr. Popo Plays 2018, titled, "Entitled Mother Tried to Take My Stuff." Hi people. I was like 10 at the time of this happening, so not everything will be clear. Hope it's okay. Our cast are me, a legend, EM, entitled mother, EK, entitled kid, and C, my carer. Okay, it was my 10th birthday, and I wanted Nerf guns. I'd got 2 for my birthday and was celebrating my great occasion. My cousins went over, and one of them, entitled kid, really liked my Nerf guns. And here is where the trouble begins. Entitled kid says to me, "Hey OP, can I have one of your guns?" So I say, "Sorry kid, I just got them and I don't want to give them away yet." Entitled kid accepts this as an answer, or so I thought, when his mother asks me to go somewhere for a minute. When I return, the family are leaving and both of my guns are in entitled kid's hands. I sprint to their car and knock on the window, telling entitled kid to give the guns back. He did, and was genuinely sorry, but the mother thought that he deserved them, so she told him to never share with me again. My carer was telling me the mother was like that and it would be fine. Entitled kid is one of my best friends, and entitled mother still doesn't really like me. I know this story was short, but I felt like sharing it. And then they just do a whole bunch of edits about the upvotes. And our next story was posted by user Fiend Turi, titled, "Entitled Gaslighting Grandpa Defends Bullying the Bereaved." Long backstory. Edits at the bottom, Yes, it's long. Very, very long. I wrote the beast and I'm still knackered. Okay, I just scrolled down. This is a really long story. Note, I decided to post this in a few subreddits, so if the mods think it's not relevant for whatever reason, that's fine. No TLDR, as I think the title sums it up if you don't want a long read. So, I decided to write this following an argument that finally happened yesterday, or a few days ago. It happened on the 15th of December. But this has taken me some time to write. There's going to a fair bit to unpack, so I'm going to set it into 3 sections. Backstory, incident, argument. People will either be given fake names, or just referred to by relation. Side note, I find it annoying when people put M is mum, D is dad. Just write the 2 extra letters. Anyway, onwards. It is very, very long, but there's a lot to go through. And a lot I need to vent about because I'm still so frustrated that this happened. All talk of family members, cousins, grandparents, etc. will be on my dad's paternal side. So dad's grandmother will be my father's father's mother. Grandpa is my father's father. I also want to point out that while this is written from my point of view, the entitled parent / narcissist in this situation is my paternal grandfather. My own dad has always been amazing and is my best friend to this day. He's also given me permission to post this on Reddit from my point of view. It's long, but really this is just the tip of the iceberg. Backstory. As I said just before, Dad is my best friend. I'm in my late 20s and live with him out of choice, and would still be living with him even if we were millionaires. I live with my dad, younger brother, and fiancé. We're all a very close unit. When I see a lot of the stories on here, I realize how truly lucky I am. Even my fiancé says my dad has been a better dad to her than her own father. For Dad, however, growing up was very different. In a nutshell, his father was incredibly emotionally and often physically abusive. While there are many incidents from Dad's childhood that are shocking, and this story is just one of the horrendous examples, the main theme has been one of rejection by his father's side of the family. My grandpa and his parents, siblings, and said siblings' offspring all come from a small village in Yorkshire. My dad, however, was born in the south of England, in Kent. If you're unaware of the north and south divide in England, just know that some people from Yorkshire are generally incredibly proud of being from Yorkshire, and often tell stories and jokes where the main point is how Yorkshire is so much better than the rest of the UK. For my extended family, their loyalty towards Yorkshire was, and is excessive to say the least. Unfortunately for Dad, this manifested itself in the form of bullying a child. Every school holiday, every Christmas, even the odd weekend, Dad was forced to go up to Yorkshire to visit his paternal family, his grandparents, cousins, etc., during which he was essentially the butt of every joke. They would bully him something rotten, making fun of him for everything he did and everything he was. A lot of it was to do with being from the south, laughing at his accent, making fun of him for being different, often trying to find stuff about him to make fun of, just to satisfy this strange superiority complex they had, a lot of which we argue is Grandpa's fault. After all, if he really wanted a son with a northern accent, why didn't he just stay in the north? To show the extent of how far they would go, if Dad went to the corner shop as a kid to buy some sweets or a comic, the local kids would shout abuse at him. This was brushed off, as the village only had a tiny handful of families. Dad did mention the kids in a nearby town were nice, and they played with him, but most of the time he was in the village and dealt with this abuse. The main culprit of the bullying, other than my grandfather, was Dad's grandmother, who would criticize him constantly and talk about how much better his cousins were doing than him. She was very cruel and manipulative, and my grandpa, being a mummy's boy, wouldn't dare hear a word against her. Everything she did was perfect, and the constant bullying was either rose-tinted when spoke about. If Dad spoke up about the bullying, even decades later, he gets shouted down and quite literally told to shut up about it, or will be lied to about what really happened. One of my grandpa's main emotional abuse tactics was, and definitely still is, gaslighting to the nth degree. He will say something, then quickly lie about what he was said, even when he just said it. Pretend whoever heard it either didn't hear him right or didn't remember properly. He will also quickly say that he doesn't remember situations to get out of any guilt when this abuse has been addressed. A serious, open conversation about pain caused and how healing can start is usually brushed off with, "Don't be stupid," even when trying to approach it as gently as possible. Grandpa is also very stubborn and very dictatorial, as well as manipulative. His opinions are always right, and he will deliberately bring up things to cause conflict only to say his opinion, and then say, "Now we won't talk about it anymore," and forcing people to be quiet, as in shouting them down if they disagree. While this can be about big issues like politics, he also gets this stubborn about most mundane things. When we said we were not keen on these toasted tea cakes from Yorkshire, his response was that, "Can't have done them right. Nothing from Yorkshire can be bad, so clearly we're too incompetent to use a toaster." This is his logic for every little thing. It is worth mentioning that due to Grandpa's nature, due to being hard-headed, stubborn, and shouting people down, he's pushed away essentially everyone in his life. He has very little friends, upsets everyone that he worked with, as he was a control freak, and won't show any compassion to anyone slightly different than him. The only people that come to visit him, other than the carers he needs due to his age, are us. Dad's brother only sees him once a year at Christmas, if that, and last year he went alone without his wife and daughter. Dad tries to see him every few weeks, once or twice a month, despite the emotional abuse, just because he wants to be a good son. It also takes Dad about 2 hours to drive up there and 2 hours back, if the traffic is good. It's also worth mentioning that even when Grandpa was younger and healthier, that family that lived in Yorkshire never went down south to visit him, and still have never come down south to visit us. It was always Grandpa, Grandma, Dad, and his brother that would go up to Yorkshire. Also, Grandpa has always been a liar. There are constant times where he's embellished stories, changed situations, or outright denied that he did something seconds after he did it. Dad, on the other hand, has always proved to be honest. I cannot think of a single time that Dad has been dishonest to me, unless you count nice situations, like last year when he told me I should look for a Nintendo Switch in the January sales if I wanted one, so that it would be a big surprise when he got me one for Christmas. Another culprit of the bullying was Dad's oldest cousin Mary. Mary was the oldest cousin, and so was perfect in her grandmother's eyes, so their grandmother's cruel nature didn't extend to Mary. She also relished in the bullying. Even though my father is a fair few years younger than her, she didn't care that she was older and was picking on a child. For her, and for many other members of the family, Dad only existed so they had someone to ridicule during family visits. What needs to be noted is that Grandpa never defended Dad. When they bullied Dad, Grandpa joined in. Not only would he join in, but he would often instigate it, pointing out things about Dad in hopes that the extended family would mock him too. Not only did he always take extended family's side over Dad, insulting him for getting upset at the bullying, but he would take the other person's side in any dispute, regardless of whom it was with or what it was about. If Dad had a minor argument with someone on the way home from school and vented about it, Grandpa would use this as an excuse to flex his debating skills and immediately take the other person's side. It didn't matter who the other person was or what the dispute was about. Even the most minor things would be because Dad didn't do X right. When Grandpa tried to force family comes first on Dad, Dad always assumed that that meant the Yorkshire family, and not him and his brother. In context, Dad mentioned how he never said the phrase, "family comes first" to me, which was always said to him. And yet I always put family first because of the relationship we have. Being this stubborn, Grandpa refused to hear anything bad about his mother. even when we tried to approach the fact that she was abusive as gently as possible. I tried to appeal to his sense of empathy, saying how it had hurt Dad and the effects such things have on a child. His response was just to shout, "Well, how would you like it if I insulted your mother?" who passed away when I was 12. Of course, there's a massive difference between a grandson approaching the subject of familial emotional abuse rather than a grandfather insulting his late daughter-in-law directly to her son. Note, my mum did have her issues, and we have been able to discuss this in a healthy way. I recognize she wasn't perfect, even though I do love and miss her, but she was always wonderful to Grandpa and tried to show herself as a good daughter-in-law. Considering that this was Dad's entire childhood until he was able to escape at university, meant that the relationship between him and his extended family is fractured, and he is still carrying a load of emotional baggage from the rejection he's been put through since birth. Now that the backstory is there, on to the main incident. Incident. In 2016, my grandmother passed away. I was of course upset, as I liked my grandmother, but it was worse for Dad, as he had lost his mother. She was 84, but losing a mother is never easy, as I know painfully well, which will all be very relevant later. As I mentioned a few paragraphs above, when I was 12, and my little brother was 4, my mother passed away. She was in her early 40s, as was Dad, so this was a greatly traumatic event for all. Dad had to not only deal with the grief of losing his wife incredibly prematurely, but also had to raise 2 children on his own who were dealing with the death of their mother. Then, the subsequent mental health problems that arose. Luckily, Dad, being the amazing person that he is, has stuck with me and supported me throughout these issues, and even though it was of course distressing for him. Fact is that my brother and I have never for 1 second doubted that we were the most important thing in Dad's life. I've always felt that he was proud of me. As Dad has always been there for me, I want to be there for him whenever he needs. I knew that the funeral was going to be difficult, but not due to any bereavement, but due to the fact that it was going to take place in Yorkshire. This meant that there would be a drive up there, the fact that Dad would have to see several childhood bullies and abusers and act like everything was okay, and just generally dealing with the stress and grief of traveling across the country to go to a funeral in the first place. It started off grim, and Grandpa began his usual nonsense the moment we arrived. For some reason, Grandpa is almost religiously loyal to the supermarket Tesco. I don't know why. We all find it very bizarre. My uncle, Dad's brother, casually mentioned that he had been to Morrison's, another supermarket, before arriving at the funeral, to which Grandpa barked, "Your mother hated Morrison's," as if going to that supermarket before the funeral was somehow disrespectful to her memory. We doubt it was true, as Dad says he only remembers Grandpa saying one thing about Morrison's that was mildly positive. Meanwhile, a cousin said that he would come to the funeral, didn't show up, then said he would come to the subsequent memorial service, didn't show up, and that was quickly forgiven and forgotten. If we were to be completely honest, I would say that we weren't happy with the service that my grandmother was given. She was an actress in her youth, and had a deep love of the performing arts, especially A Midsummer Night's Dream. However, rather than a funeral for my grandmother or Dad's mother, or anything that made her the person that she was, the funeral was just one for my grandfather's wife. Grandpa had arranged everything, so that he was the only one allowed to tell anecdotes, which only involved ones where she made him look good in his career. There were none of the stories that she liked to tell about her youth, which I could easily tell off my heart, and her relatives were also upset that in her final goodbyes, she seemed only to exist in her role as my grandfather's wife. At the end of the funeral, charity donations are usually taken, which usually went to a cause that the deceased believes in. To add insult to injury, donations were asked to go to the Yorkshire Cricket Club, a sport my grandfather likes and a team he supports, nothing to do with my grandmother. We later opted to get a chair in her local theatre inscribed with her name as a nice memorial, due to her love of the arts. Already, it was starting to feel tense, as we definitely noticed the one-sided view of my grandmother, but kept being friendly and polite to keep everything as nice as possible. After all, it was a funeral. We went to the little village hall where there was a spread for her wake. We used the opportunity to be friendly to family members we hadn't seen in many years, and to just catch up with small talk. It was going as well as possible it could given the situation, before Mary came swanning over. Just to reiterate, Mary is related to my grandmother by blood. She is his niece, and this was my grandmother's wake, whom she is only related to by marriage. Small talk started, which already seemed judgmental and more like an interrogation from Mary, but as she hadn't yet said anything too bad, we just continued to answer as politely as possible. However, this wasn't good enough for Mary, and as Dad in her eyes was just someone for her to bully for fun, it did not take long for it to start again. The funeral was in July, and my dad had tanned. Bearing in mind, ethnically we're all white. I've always been jealous of his ability to tan, but unfortunately I inherited Mum's skin. I burn and then go even whiter underneath. While Dad can sit out in the sun for an hour easily and be alright, I have to find shade after about 15 minutes or I will burn. My brother, similarly, is more like my mum than Dad in terms of skin tone. Burns, but still tans slightly easier than I do. Mary noticed this, and felt that it was possible to say the following joke in a very loud, firm, and accusatory tone. Dad's name. Why are you so brown and your kids so white? Are they really not yours? Yes, that was her idea of a joke. Mary's idea of humor is to say that my father's dead wife cheated on him, and that his own 2 children, who mean the world to him, are illegitimate idiots. This was the joke at my dad's expense that she thought was appropriate to make at his mother's funeral. Of course, this is all bollocks. Dad is my biological father and my brother's, and there has never been a doubt of this, mainly because we look so much like him that there's no chance of there being any doubt. I would say this joke was the straw that broke the camel's back, but I think calling it a straw takes away from the gravity of what she said. Although there's no truth to it, the joke was incredibly hurtful, not just to Dad, but also to my brother and me. Not only was it another cruel joke at my father's expense, but it's also one where the joke is a break in the family structure between me and my brother and my dad. It's also a way of emphasizing the rejection that Dad felt towards that side of his family, that my brother and I can't truly be members of the family if we are not related to him. There's also that glaringly obvious fact that if someone is at their mother's funeral, you don't cut the tension by insulting their dead wife. Of course, as Mary seemed to think that Dad's purpose was to be someone to pick on to make all the other family members laugh, this didn't seem to be an issue to her. We did not answer, and walked away more in shock as we were trying to process not only what she said, but the fact that she has the audacity to say it at the funeral service. Dad was, of course, incredibly distraught, and utterly shocked at that fact that this would happen, even after the years of abuse he faced at the hands of these people. We spoke about it with each other and to friends, mostly because such an incident takes an emotional toll that needs time to process. After some time, Dad decided it would be best to tell Grandpa what happened, and how much pain it had caused, not just because he wanted the situation resolved, but also because he really wanted to give Grandpa the opportunity to be there for him once. He wanted to give Grandpa the opportunity to actually be a father, to be on his side and defend his son, and agree that saying such a thing, especially at a funeral, is unacceptable. When Grandpa was told about the situation, he immediately started brushing it off as nothing. When Dad stated that it really hurt to have his own children and late wife insulted at his mother's funeral, the following happened. Grandpa: "Don't be daft." Dad: "This is exactly what I'm talking about. I tell you about something utterly appalling, and you don't take my side. You just tell me not to be daft." Grandpa starts shouting, "I said she was daft." Gaslighting. It's one of Grandpa's favorite techniques. To just lie, deny the past, and cover up which one had a profound effect on Dad. Panicking if something happens to make him doubt himself and his memory. Of course, as Dad was the one being gaslit, he struggled to see it himself, and instantly I could see the worry, doubt, and confusion on his face. This caused a rage to bubble up inside of me, as I love Dad more than anything in this world, and I hated to see him so clearly being emotionally abused right in front of me. Straight away, I called Grandpa out on his bullshit. I told him that he definitely did not say that she, Mary, was daft. That he did, in fact, call my father daft, and that what he was doing is an emotional abuse tactic known as gaslighting. Of course, Grandfather's response was just to shout back non-responses. Give over. Oh, stop it. Just shut up and drop it. Stop being stupid. Or now listen. Followed by an irrelevant story. We left with Dad, of course feeling absolutely rotten that this was Grandpa's one chance to do something right, but feeling better that someone was on his side and was able to point out exactly what he was doing. Emotional abuse sows seeds of self-doubt, so it's difficult, if not impossible, to call it out on your own. We asked Grandpa to talk to Mary as we no longer wanted anything to do with her, especially as she was his niece and he still has regular phone contact with Deirdre, Mary's mother, and Grandpa's sister. At first, he said he would. Then he said he did, and only after we received a phone call from Mary did we realize that no, he hadn't told her at all. She conveniently forgot about it, then started to try and harass Dad over the phone, only stopping the phone calls once we unplugged the phone. Nevertheless, we hoped to move on despite the situation, and believed that while we couldn't get through to him, at least we were able to let him know what happened and express the deep hurt that it caused. Grandpa, however, being manipulative and stubborn in his ways, didn't want to let this drop. Rather than accepting that we no longer wanted anything to do with Mary, if that was the way she was going to treat us, he decided to continuously try to subtly bring her up in conversations. First, he would bring her up directly, saying that Mary is ever so good to Deirdre, you know? We told him that, after the hurt she caused, we did not want anything to do with her, and that we would appreciate it if he did not bring her up again. Then he tried more subtle ways. He would read out a card he received, prompt us into agreeing with him that the card was lovely, saying, "Oh, isn't it a nice message?" Only to reveal that the card was from Mary. He would also bring up Deirdre often, although it was always followed up with, "Well, she's lucky she has Mary," or "Mary does take such good care of her," or "Good thing for Mary, huh?" Before this incident, while we would talk about family members now and then, he definitely didn't talk about Mary anywhere near as much as he did after the incident. His actions showed that he was far more concerned with trying to manipulate Dad into having a positive opinion of Mary and to whitewash the incident as nothing, even though Dad didn't have a high opinion of Mary anyway due to the previous bullying that lasted years. This happened a few times, with Dad making it very clear that he was completely uncomfortable with ever having anything to do with Mary, that what she said, along with the timing, was absolutely disgusting. Over a few months, this kept happening, and Grandpa finding subtle ways to bring her up and try and put a rose-tinted view on her. And now to the argument. End of November/early December, Dad went up for a visit while I was at work. As soon as we met up again, Dad told me it was a bloody disaster. Already, I was starting to expect the worst, due to Grandpa having such a terrible track record. When Dad visited, Grandpa brought out a picture of Grandma's gravestone. He had made a point of talking about how well tended to the grave was, and how the headstone was clean and flowers had been put there. He encouraged Dad to agree that it was lovely before dropping the bombshell that it was Mary that had tended to the grandmother's grave. Due to Mary's unkind and selfish nature, we're sure that she's only doing this in the hopes that she will be in Grandpa's will, but this is only speculation. Straight away, Dad pointed out that he was worried that he would do something like this, that he was really upset, angry, hurt, etc., that his father would bring up someone he knew because he knew it caused a lot of pain to our side of the family. After making it very clear that he was sick of having this bully brought up time and time again, especially after making it clear that he didn't want anything to do with her, and that this fracture can't be mended, he came out with the following: "I don't remember any of that." I mentioned that this was definitely an abuse tactic, that he was just pretending not to remember in order to get away with bringing her up again, despite being told many times not to. Dad said that to him, it doesn't matter whether it was a lie, since it definitely is, given Grandpa's history of constant lies, or whether he forgot, because forgetting something that important would prove that he doesn't care. Just to make it clear, although he's now in his late 80s, my grandfather doesn't have any issues with his memory. He was always crap with remembering who had a birthday when, but never anything this significant. The issue is he brought her up when he made it clear that doing so causes pain. There was a minor argument between the two of them. Not the argument in question, where Grandpa tried to brush it off as nothing big, and Dad telling him that this was it. That there would be absolutely no mention of Mary from now on, that he wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. We wanted nothing to do with her, and Grandpa just had to accept that he couldn't change our minds. This small argument really affected Dad. Over the next couple of weeks, he was in a very low mood. A lot of bad memories from his past had been brought up, involving the bullying, the rejection, everything else that he was put through as a child. As a son who loves his father a hell of a lot, I really struggled to see Dad hurting so much. Due to Grandpa's actions, I was a little nervous when we made this trip up to see him on Sunday. Every year, just before Christmas, we go up to exchange gifts with Grandpa, as well as Dad's brother and his side of the family. This year, and last year, it was just us that went up to see him. Surprisingly, the visit started off relatively well. We dropped off the presents. Grandpa asked me about work. We had a little chat about what we had been up to in our free time, and it was all going as amicably as possible. Of course, Grandpa came out with his usual disapproval of modern times crap, complaining that nobody dances on Strictly Come Dancing anymore, and that they're all just jigging about. But it isn't anything other than what we would expect from someone who refuses to have internet connection in his house, because if he does, then the Chinese will empty his bank account, all because of some bollocks that happened when he was a bank manager in the 80s. We had been there for a few hours, so it was starting to wind down. Like many situations, all was well until I went to the toilet. I excused myself to pop to the loo, and I was washing my hands. I hear shouting. Mainly my dad shouting. I was worried something like this would happen. I can't trust you at all with anything. I stepped out of the bathroom, and Dad beckoned me into the kitchen where he was able to tell me exactly what he said. While I was in the loo, Grandpa mentioned he'd heard from some family members, namely the one cousin that Dad actually gets along with. Dad was relatively comfortable with the conversation, as there had been no reference to Mary, until Grandpa said the following. "I don't think there are any members of our family I don't get along with, don't you?" That was when Dad reached breaking point, saying that it was all going well right up until he sneakily said that. Grandpa was aware that I had been helping Dad through his emotional abuse, and that I was the one to help him understand how serious it was. So he had deliberately waited until I was out of the room for a few minutes to bring it up. Dad said he wouldn't have minded had Grandpa said that he got on with everyone and left it as it is. It was the fact that just saying, "Don't you?" pigeonholed Dad into either blindly agreeing with him, which I'm sure was what Grandpa wanted, as he always was forcing his opinion on everyone, or then forcing Dad to say, "No, I don't get along with Mary," which would have brought her up. After Dad brought me up to speed, I walked through into the living room where Grandpa was shouting that he never brought up Mary in the conversation. I pointed out that he definitely did, which was when he started arguing that he never mentioned her by name, and it was Dad that decided it was all about her, and I just said how I felt about the family. I never asked Dad what he thought because I know. What Dad did next, I was very proud of. He straight up called Grandpa out on his emotional abuse, specifically his gaslighting. He reiterated that he said the family, which Mary is a part of, the fact that he tried to force Dad to agree, then the fact that he covered up what he said with lies. He even said the phrase, "It's emotional abuse and it's called gaslighting," which I was really proud of. I've seen all the effects this abuse has had on Dad, and the continuing effects it still has. So the fact he didn't accept any of the bollocks coming out of Grandpa's mouth was fantastic. Of course, I was there to back him up, which he said meant a lot, as previously in his life, it had been him alone against family bullies. But he managed to stand up for himself against his abuser. It all then came out, with Dad saying this was another case of him never taking his side, that how he had told people about Mary's behavior, and they all agreed it was absolutely appalling and disgusting, and that any good father would agree you shouldn't mock his son's children, and late wife at his mother's funeral. Grandpa kept arguing that it should be dropped because there's nothing I can do now, and it doesn't matter what I do. We tried to say that yes, he can do something. He can take our side for once, or at least not mention Mary when he knows the pain it causes. Dad said that he keeps mentioning her deliberately, knowing it would cause us pain. He said he didn't deliberately try and cause pain, to which I replied if he said something, knowing it would hurt us emotionally, even if that wasn't his intention, then that was as bad as doing it intentionally. Then Dad walked out to calm down, and I decided to try and appeal to Grandpa, evidently very small, sense of compassion and empathy. It was frustrating, as Grandpa kept trying to shout over me, doing everything he could to simply shut down the conversation. Nevertheless, I tried. I said that I really wanted the family to heal, and that we wanted to move forwards, and that this was something Dad wanted too, as he wouldn't keep visiting if he didn't care about his father. I really hoped that perhaps if Grandpa could understand why Mary's joke hurt as much as it did, then perhaps he would understand why we wanted nothing to do with her. I started to talk frankly to Grandpa, saying that it hurt a great deal that she insulted my mother. Remember previously when I mentioned that he screamed at me, "How would you like it if I insulted your mother?" Then didn't seem to have an issue with Mary doing it. So I tried to get him to empathize with the pain I went through of losing my mother, only to have someone make the joke that she did, which quite literally adds insult to injury. I looked him in the eyes and spoke seriously. "Grandpa, I lost my mum 5 days after my 12th birthday. It was utterly devastating to lose my mother at such a young age. I have had to see therapists, other mental health professionals, as..." Grandpa cuts me off. "I lost my wife!" That's right, reader. My grandfather compared me, losing my mother as a 12-year-old, after she had been diagnosed with cancer when I was 9 years old, so a quarter of my time with her was spent in and out of hospital worrying about how I might be losing her, to him losing his wife when she was 86 and he was 84. So, rather than seeing it as me trying to get him to empathize with our situation, he just saw it as a competition for who had suffered the most. That was when Dad snapped and actually shouted at Grandpa. I did point out later on that I noticed that Dad only got this level of furious, shouting angry once Grandpa wronged me, rather than when he wronged himself, which I feel proves that he always puts me and my brother before himself. He came through, shouting, "How dare you! How dare you make such a comparison! It is nowhere near the same!" Dad laid it on thick, but I have to say everything that he said was completely valid. He shouted that Grandpa was fundamentally dishonest, emotionally abusive, and that he was disgustingly selfish. He said that this was another case of Grandpa thinking about himself and never actually caring about his kids, and subsequent grandkids, as he should. Dad also said that he loved his children so much, and actually becoming a father means he doesn't understand at all, emotionally, how Grandpa can be so heartless when all that matters to Dad is the happiness of his kids. Dad also mentioned that while he also lost his wife, it wouldn't be a fair comparison either, as Dad lost Mum to cancer when they were in their early 40s, whereas Grandpa lost Grandma when they were in their mid-80s, which rather than being tragically early, is a natural part of life and to be expected. But the fact he dared compare it to my grief as a child was precisely what made it so much worse. Dad's main points were to do with the abuse that he suffered greatly due to his rejection he kept going through over and over again based on not being from Yorkshire, that other family members have been allowed to abuse him because they're from Yorkshire and he's not, that even now he cares more about his niece being able to make disgusting jabs at our side of the family more than his own son being insulted at a funeral. A few other dynamics in the family were mentioned, but it would be going off topic to list them now. Nevertheless, there was a lot of hypocrisy from the abusive side of the family. During this argument, Grandpa deflected as much as he could, saying the following classic lines: "All you're doing is shouting at me. It doesn't matter what I do, does it? You'll just disagree. Well, I think that's the end of this visit then. Stop shouting. Just get out. No matter what I do, you'll just shout at me. All you ever do is shout at me. Don't be stupid. Oh, just shut up. Shut up!" To note, Grandpa, in his old age, has become relatively deaf and refuses to acknowledge it, so a lot of the time shouting is just necessary just so he can hear us. When being aggressive and shouting didn't work, he started to pretend to flinch and cower as if we were going to hit him. It is worth mentioning that Dad and I have never been violent, but Grandpa did regularly beat Dad when he was a child. Nevertheless, he tried to cower, whimpering and covering his face, then trying to complain that he was just in too much pain from his arthritis. Dad pointed at Grandpa's hand and said, "This is karma. You are suffering all the pain that you have given many other people." Dad later told me that he felt really guilty about saying this, and that a great deal of him wishes he hadn't. To be completely honest, I think it was more than fair enough. Dad has suffered so much due to the ongoing emotional abuse he's been through at the hands of Grandpa, not just from him instigating it, but him allowing and encouraging others to bully his own son. He also caused pain to many other people, those that he managed as a bank manager, my grandma as well as his ex-wife from before her, other family members, colleagues, and friends. He's been a horrible person to many people. The Dad has said a few times that one of the ways he copes with the pain that he's been through is by thinking of Grandpa's suffering being karma. I know it's something he's thought about quite a bit, and isn't something that he would just say to cause pain. Dad walked out of the house, and my brother followed after, trying to check up on Dad as best he could. My brother is autistic, and understands the kind of person Grandpa is. While he couldn't get involved in the argument, he showed real concern for Dad afterwards. As this happened, I turned to Grandpa and said, "I've looked in your heart to see if there's any compassion, any empathy, and I can see that there is none." We left, and while the aftermath was incredibly difficult for Dad, he did say that he felt better after the visit where it all came off of his chest. And with me backing him up, than it did the time before with Grandpa doing his classic, emotionally abusive and gaslighting techniques while on his own. Dad normally phones him up after a visit to let him know that we got home okay, as it is a 2-hour journey. I elected to phone Grandpa this time, as I know it would be far too emotionally raw for Dad to do so. When I phoned him, he acted like nothing had happened, asked about the traffic, and left it at that. Dad also phoned up to wish Grandpa a happy birthday since, and similarly, he acted as if nothing happened. I would not be surprised if he tries to push the Mary issue later. Dad is doing his own therapeutic writing about the situation, which started before the big argument on Sunday. What he does with the writing afterwards is up to him, but there may be updates on this story. Similarly, I might post a few others, as this post is now over 6,500 words. Oof. And I've only touched on a part of it. And just in case anyone doubted the cruel, selfish nature that Mary has, I googled her name since the argument, and it turns out she's been done for sexual harassment and stalking an ex-colleague after they had an affair, while they were both married. This was only uncovered after a culture of bullying and harassment was whistleblown at her workplace, where the sexual harassment and stalking then came to light. I think if you encourage a child to bully another child that's considerably younger, it naturally causes their sense of entitlement, superiority, and sadism to grow. It doesn't surprise me that she's a sex offender, although it does make me even more disgusted to be related to this woman. Thank you for the golden upvotes and all of the comments. I wasn't expecting it to get this much attention that it did. Thanks so much to those who left supportive messages. I've shown a fair few to Dad, which has helped him feel a little more validated. He wanted me to give thanks too. And to those that say we should break off all contact, it has been very, very tempting. However, he is 87 now, and to quote Dad, we've frickin' earned what's coming up to us in the will, which should be a comfortable sum. I understand and respect this. After he's passed, all of the abusive and enabling family members will be completely cut off. That's an interesting one there. I think, yeah, he's 87, he's gonna die soon and you're gonna get the will. Yes, he's abusive. I think you should still keep him there until he dies, even if he's dumb. Yeah, personally, I don't think that cutting dad off completely before, it's not long now, he's 87, not everyone lives to 100, not everyone lives past 87. Yeah, that's a really tough situation. I'd like to know what you guys think of it in the comments there. In all honesty, that's an interesting one. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the episode today. Tell me what you thought of this incredibly long story, as well as the two before it. Yeah, I hope you guys have a good afternoon. This was 15 minutes longer than a normal episode, which isn't crazy, it's like 3 episodes in one, so hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!